Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Florida Bar Alternative Dispute Resolution and Public Interest Law Sections webinar, Trauma, Its Impact on Cases and Clients, presented by the Honorable Jack Helinger. We have an incredible presentation that includes a panel of jurors from around our state that will discuss this important topic. My name is Christina Blunt, and I will be moderating this webinar today for the Alternative Dispute Resolution section, of which I am a member of the CLE committee. If you are not a member of the ADR section, I encourage you to join this dynamic group. Our membership is comprised of mediators, arbitrators, and attorneys who participate in various forms of dispute resolution. The ADR section offers valuable resources and networking opportunities with others who are leaders in the field of ADR. Now, quick housekeeping matters. As you know, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the ADR section's YouTube channel for the next 18 months, should you wish to watch it again or if you have to leave early. Please remember to mute yourself and consider leaving your video on to engage. If you wish to ask questions of the speaker, panelists, or need technical assistance, please enter your questions into the chat and your questions will be answered as time allows. This webinar provides CLE and CME credit. You will need to log into the Florida Bar Members Portal to enter your own CLE credit. The course number for today is 9531. Let me repeat that, 9531. And that counts for 1.5 hours of general CLE, 0.5 ethics, 1.0 mental health, and 1.8 IPV or interpersonal violence credit. This course also qualifies for CME credit, which does not require a course number as it is self-reporting for the purpose of renewal. Now, I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce our main presenter, the Honorable Jack Helinger. Judge Helinger has been a fierce and tireless advocate for the discussion of trauma and its impact on the legal system and its participants. Although he is presently a family law judge in the 6th Judicial Circuit in Pinellas County, he has also been involved in the Florida Supreme Court Steering Committee for Family and Children in the courts, a mentor judge, and continues to be heavily involved in judicial and attorney education. Judge Helinger, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. And I want to thank my fellow presenters today for taking their time. We're here to talk about trauma. When trauma goes unrecognized, justice falls short. Trauma is often directly involved in many of our cases, but when trauma, even when it's not directly involved, can often affect people involved in a case. It can affect your client, can affect the opposing party, opposing counsel, yourself, and as a judge, affect us sometimes. So we need to have a deep understanding of trauma, especially to help people and help improve their decision-making and support their reasonable, compassionate, effective resolution of cases. These principles apply across the board. We learn a lot about these in the juvenile arena, the domestic relations arena, the interpersonal violence, but frankly, it applies to every kind of case, not necessarily in every case, but every kind of case can be affected by it. And I have said this many, many times in my travels. If there's trauma in a case and we miss the trauma, we have missed the case. We have missed how to handle the case properly. So the purpose of this today will be multifold, but in large part, it's that all of us will become more trauma informed and therefore trauma responsive. I suspect with all the people, and thank you all for being here today, we're going to have people with various knowledges and awareness of the issues of trauma, from being very, very trauma informed to, wow, I never learned much about this. But all of us can hopefully get a little bit better about it, regardless of our knowledge when we walk in here today. You're going to hear from incredible people from around the state of Florida on this issue. I'd like to first call upon Chief Judge Diana Moreland. She's out of the 12th Circuit, Sarasota, Manatee counties in that general area. Judge Moreland is I will jokingly call her the reigning champion of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Award. meaning of the approximate 500 circuit judges at our conference this August, she received the Chief Justice Award for all she does with the system. She is very, very trauma informed and is here to speak not only on behalf of the 12th Circuit, but as a chief judge in the state. Judge Moreland?
Thank you so much, Judge Helinger, and thank you everybody for allowing me to be here today. I first got to experience the trauma training in October when Judge Helinger asked for it to come here in the 12th Judicial Circuit, and it was a awakening to finally put a name to something that I knew existed all along, and to see that other persons also recognize trauma has a huge impact. So often I hear the phrase that the judges are here to call balls and strikes. Well, on the way to doing the balls and strikes and moving cases in this growing concern with case management and case timelines, etc., I think we have to recognize, or as Judge Helinger says, we're going to miss the case altogether, that there are some cases that are just different and require us to look through a trauma lens, which means that we have to know the history of the people in our courtroom. We need to understand the telltale signs of trauma and adverse childhood experiences. We have to become understanding of what is an adverse childhood experience, and when may we see that we are actually one of the persons inflicting an child experience, an acute experience. So with that in mind, I'd like to say that I encourage every judge. You may not believe everything that you heard today, but to be ignorant is not an excuse. At least if you listen to the people, you'll have a wider base of information. I will say that this has been a long time coming. We've done this in decade chunks. We first had the Family Courts Commission was put together in 1980. And in 1991, we did the one family, one judge was actually recognized, understanding that family division judges needed to treat a family and the children with respect and with the common knowledge of how to handle those cases. So we separated her from the civil division. A short decade later, you're going to learn that we had the stress of the Supreme Court reiterated the importance of embracing methods of resolving disputes that do not cause additional emotional harm to the children and families we are serving. And we came out with the 12 guiding principles of defining and implementing the family model, which specifically spoke to trauma and how to reduce that and the impact negatively felt by families in our court system. Another short decade later, in 2011, we had 2 AOs from the Supreme Court that were being implemented in other circuits concerning unified family procedures that were recognized. But most importantly, we have to realize this is not just a family issue or a juvenile court issue. This goes into every division. I think if you think of the cases, especially the attorneys, the judiciary, and the experts that are here, they can all identify cases that are extra to family or juvenile for which they have seen families with trauma, persons with trauma. We have problem-solving courts where it would not work if the judges didn't understand the idea of trauma. So with that in mind, I hope all of you listen as closely as I did when Judge Helinger and his team came to the 12th Judicial Circuit and take away a lot from this seminar. Thank you, Judge Helinger, for inviting me here today, and I greatly appreciate all you've done through the years to bring this subject forward and to be recognized by 200 and at least 13 some people today. Thank you, sir.
Good. Judge Moreland, thank you so much for your time being here today as a chief judge. I have an idea how incredibly demanding demands are made upon you. I know you've got to scoot to another matter, but thank you and your kind words on behalf of the chief judges of the state of Florida. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so everybody here, how in the world does this apply to me? You may be in family, you may be in criminal, you may be in juvenile, but a lot of you all are going to be in other areas. So how does this apply to me? I'd like you to keep asking that question today, and I hope and I think we're going to be able to answer it for you. Nothing that we talk about today is in any way a criticism of our system. It's a great system. But anything can be made a little bit better. And if we become trauma informed and therefore trauma responsive when it applies in our cases, and it doesn't apply in every case, but it does in a lot, then it can be a little bit better. And that's the goal for today. That is the goal. So we're all lawyers or we wouldn't be here. What do they teach us? They teach us how to develop and analyze facts. And then they teach us how to read the law and match up the facts with the law and argue about it, right? And then we have cases, and what do we do with cases? We either settle them or we litigate them. Good stuff. I love this system. I'm aging myself, but I'm in my 50th year doing this. I'm an old trial lawyer. I love a good trial. And sitting on the bench for many years now, I still love a great litigation before me. But what most of us are not taught, we're not taught growing up in our lives. We're not, most of us, taught in college. We sure as heck are not taught in law school. And very few of us are taught in our initial jobs. Another very, very, very important part of the practice of law and the ultimate resolution of matters in a fair and appropriate way. What we're not taught about is people. We're not taught why they are the way they are, why they act the way they do, why they continue to screw up. The cynical part of me says, boy, that's great for us because it's good for our business and they wouldn't need very many of us if people didn't screw up. But we need to understand, if we're going to do our job the best, why they do that. How in the world can people go from love to hate so quickly sometimes? Why people won't stop drinking, drugging, or hitting? Why they won't follow our advice when we know our advice is good and in their best interest? Why they won't reasonably settle a case at mediation? Why they appear to be so personally affected by the case? Why in the world can, I will say, loving family members go to war over a guardianship case? Mind-boggling sometimes. Why a loving family can fight over a will? And why do they think they could get away with it and still think that they can? That's what we're not taught in life, college, law school, or our first jobs. But the longer we do this, I believe it becomes equally important with the development of the facts, the matching up of the law, but dealing with the psychological aspects of people. So as we go through this today, again, I'm going to ask you all to ask these questions to yourself, to do some self-reflection of how these things fit in to your area and your cases. Because I believe if we're going to do our jobs the best we can do it, regardless of where we fit into the system, that's what we need to do. Let me ask a basic question. What do lawyers sell? What do they sell with their time? What do they do? Anybody, can you put in the chat? Give me a word. What's the fundamental thing that lawyers sell? Anybody? I ask this question to law students sometimes. Time, sure.
Advice.
Advocacy, yes. Advice, sure. Fear reduction, yep. Promises, yes. Ethics, yes. Oh, wait, go back. Back before perspective. I saw it in there. We sell help. We help. All those answers are correct. But if we boil it down to one word, what do? We help people with their legal problems. And then all those other answers that are all correct fall in my mind, to the definition of help. So what do we need to do to really help people? I believe we need to, for many times, understand them better than we do. We're not psychologists. Most of us were not trained on these matters at all. But I will keep saying today, when they are there and we miss them, then we haven't helped our people, our clients, the whole case as much as we should. And we've really missed the opportunity to help them the best we possibly can. So there's many aspects of psychology. And I'm not a psychologist. And we don't have time today to talk about every aspect of it. So we're really going to zero in on trauma. And could you move the slide, 2 slides down, please? And next one, please. And how are people affected by trauma? What and how can we do to recognize when there is trauma? And then how do we deal with them? And let me quickly say, and again, I've been doing this for a long time, some people are just flat out jerks. They're idiots, they're nasty, they're mean, and all those things. Okay? And there's narcissists out there. And for some of those people, there's just not much we can do. But there are a lot of other people that either the same or very, very similar behavior of those who I just described are not those things. What they are, people who have suffered trauma, sometimes directly related to the case, sometimes earlier in the case, much before the case, that is being re-traumatized. And sometimes we unintentionally traumatize people just by being in the legal system and all that they have to go through. So what is trauma? Next slide, please. And we're going to go through some aspects of it, of various aspects of trauma. But what is trauma? It's basically a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Next slide, please. A psychological, emotional response to an event or experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. An emotional response to a terrible event. I'd like everybody to just take a moment and do a little reflection. I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat or talk about it, but we need to be more open about these things. And think for a minute, if you have been traumatized in some manner, and I'm not going to ask for responses. I will share something about myself that I'm not embarrassed about. At 17 years old, when I thought I was on the top of the world, I broke my neck and my life changed dramatically. And I'm still affected by that today. And boy, did I have a rough time handling not only the physical, but more than the physical, the psychological aspect of it. It was brutal. But I had some good people. I had some people that helped me. I healed better than I was supposed to. And I wouldn't be sitting here today if I didn't become resilient. And we're going to talk about resiliency from a lot of these things. But I had people that were smart enough many, many years ago to not condemn me for my thoughts and my actions in response to that, but instead of trying to understand me and help me. And for that, I will be deeply and forever appreciative. I'm not a neurologist. There's a whole lot about the brain I don't know, but I have learned from my studies and trying to learn more about trauma. I'll talk about 2 parts of the brain that we may have heard about. The prefrontal cortex that governs impulse control and then future planning. Trauma affects that part of people's brains. So our seemingly reasonable response and impulse control, some people are just in a completely different place in the way their brain functions because of trauma. We've all heard amygdala. That controls the fight or flight part. Trauma affects that part of the person's brain where their coping mechanisms are quite different from ours. What it can then do is really distort a person's ability to process things, to understand, to be able to follow your advice. And when we deal with these people, if we don't understand that part of them or we miss that part of them, we often re-traumatize them. We get annoyed and frustrated by them. We think they are idiots or jerks or anything else. You might hopefully not directly call out to them, but think about them. But what we really have the ability to do if we understand these principles is to try to understand how their brain is working so we can reduce the traumatic effect upon them of being involved in the court system and help them. And by our actions, we can either help their trauma or we can aggravate their trauma. So we need to be very careful and not just have a negative knee-jerk reaction when somebody is acting outside of what we know, we think, and we know how they should be acting and responding and following our advice and doing what we know is best for them. And try to get to maybe why they are acting like that in compassionate, open-ended, very often private conversations with them. Next slide, please. We're now going to go into a couple of different aspects of trauma. We've all heard of PTSD. What is it? A catastrophic stressor that is outside the range of usual human experience. A lot of people from war. And the whole idea of PTSD really has been studied and become more accepted after the Vietnam War. It just first time showed up in DSM-3 in 1980. Been around in the history of the world, but it is just being better understood and developed. And sure, we're not representing, we may be representing some veterans that have been at war, and we need to understand them. But frankly, a car accident where somebody was seriously injured, I would expect that they are suffering PTSD from that. The loss of a loved one in a wrongful death case, my gosh, we would expect that they have PTSD. Victims of interpersonal violence, domestic violence, suffer PTSD. Can be a million things. Unjustly fired from a job. What an incredible event on people. Being falsely accused of something, being a defendant in a civil case, and being falsely accused of something or in a criminal case. And we have to understand that trauma is subjective to individual people. It is not an objective response. All people can respond in different ways, but we need to be aware of these principles when they arise in one of our cases. Next slide, please. I don't know how many of you all have heard of adverse childhood experiences. It is taught regularly in juvenile and family law. But it would arise, and we need to be aware of it in many, many other kind of cases, because we've all known bad stuff that happens to children is bad, right? No brainer. But the Adverse Childhood Experience study from about 25 years ago put it all together. Let me give you a quote from a Dr. Bruce Perry. What happened to you as a child shapes the way you see the world as an adult. Let me say that again. What happened to you as a child shapes the way you see the world as an adult. Pretty powerful and very, very accurate in my opinion. So what are ACEs? ACEs are bad things that happen to kids, negative situations that they experience while growing up, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, physical neglect, death or suicide of a parent, parental separation or divorce can just be devastating to people. Being a victim of domestic violence or being exposed to domestic violence in a household. When kids see this between their parents, growing up in a house where there are mental health disorders, or a parent going to jail or prison. Just brutal, brutal stuff. Judge Horkin is going to talk a little bit about ACEs later on. But what the studies show is when these things happen to children, the statistics show that they can tremendously affect people all the way into their adult life and through their adult life. It can affect them physically. It can affect them emotionally. It can affect them how they function in life, and frankly, how they see the world and how they see your advice and how they react to these things. So sometimes your question may be way out there to a client, but hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your upbringing, even if it has nothing to do with the case. And if they have enough confidence in you, then they may open up to you and tell you how they suffered from some of these things. And it may put a completely different perspective of how you treat them in the case, and so you can best help them in your representation. Next slide, please. Interpersonal violence. Given how many people are here today, some have experienced that statistically. Some have been exposed to it in their household growing up. But I suspect the majority of the people on this call have not been, because we are pretty darn fortunate or we wouldn't be here. Well, there's a lot of people that are not that fortunate out there in the world. Interpersonal violence is just that, in some form of a relationship, can really be perpetrated by anyone, but very often will include some intimate partner, acquaintance, or it can even be a stranger. And it can come in different forms. We think of it in a physical form: hitting, kicking, choking. Really, really bad, and can affect the brain development and how people see things the rest of their life. But it can also include emotional abuse, constantly putting somebody down, threatening them, financial control, coercive control, as we often learn and we see in cases. So in your representation of people, I don't know that you need to ask the direct question, hey, did you ever get the heck beat out of you in home, or did one of your parents? But there are subtle, appropriate ways to ask these things to better understand people so we can best help them. And we have to understand these things, and we were not taught them. But now we know we have to do our jobs as best we can. Next slide, please. And I'd love to spend about an hour on every one of these, but I'm giving you a quick flavor of it, hopefully whetting your appetite. Toxic stress. Is there anybody on this, you don't have to answer it, but reflect. Is there anybody on this webinar that has not felt at some point toxic stress? I doubt that there is anybody that hasn't. Excessive or prolonged activation of stress, of our stress response systems. And our stress response systems are great things. They're great things because we all have stress in life, be it in our workplace, in our home, in our kids that screw up, in somebody else who's being a jerk, in family dynamics. We all have stress. But when it is prolonged, when it is toxic, when we can't get away from it, when we don't have people to help us through that, when we keep it within ourselves and we don't feel like we can talk to anybody about it, then it becomes a huge problem. And a lot of people suffer from this. I suspect many of us have in our jobs, if nowhere else, at least earlier in our jobs, and maybe today. And maybe people we work with feel this. And maybe people at home feel this. We live in a stressful society, and we need to understand this because it can come from any source in any place. And we can help people get better if we understand it and we are open to talking about it, and we can help them through these times. But some of you all probably feel this on a daily basis, and I urge you to address it if you do. I'm sure some of you all right now are thinking about opposing counsel, and that's would fit them to a T, and why they are such a pain in the backside to deal with, or your clients, or opposing party, or some other witness who is just being obstinate and a jerk in the case. And candidly, sometimes people in the court system, we're not above it, we're people too. So we need to understand these things when we deal with them, when we talk about them, and we don't just condemn the people. Next slide, please. Vicarious trauma. What an interesting concept for those of us who have chosen to go into the legal profession. Let me ask, there's something in the chat that somebody is not seeing the slides. Is that a problem with others?
Can everybody see the slides? Thumbs up? Okay.
All right, good. What is vicarious trauma? We've probably all heard that term. An emotional and psychological impact experienced by individuals who are indirectly exposed to the trauma of others, often through firsthand accounts or narratives. Who doesn't in our profession at times and very often are exposed to vicarious trauma? I question my sanity, but the two main areas I have practiced, first as a prosecutor and then private practice, and now as a judge, have been criminal law and family law. And boy, I have seen a lot. And we need to be open to talk about these things. So I'm going to share a little, not that this is about me, but so maybe people will feel a little bit more free to talk about these things to who it would be right to talk about for themselves and anybody else to better understand them. As a judge, I get to defend the Constitution, and I love it. I love it. And I'm a strong defender of the Second Amendment. But every time I hear something about somebody being shot, especially mass shooting, I revert back to my prosecutorial days and how many people I saw in autopsies with bullet holes in them, and bodies that I stepped over at crime scenes. And I can put a spear through a fish and feel wonderful about it, but any bullet that goes through a person really affects me. No rhyme or reason to it. No logic in the reasonable sense of the word. But I cite this as an example. I hear about mass shootings and I go back to my 40-something years ago days of prosecution and murder cases I prosecuted, and then later I defended in private practice. I can't help it. It's part of the trauma I face, the vicarious trauma. I've never been shot at, and I've never been shot, but I still feel the effects of it. 45 years ago, I was stopped at a stop sign, and right in front of me was a horrific traffic accident that 2 people got killed, thrown out of the car and got killed. And I drive by this street pretty often. And not every time I drive by that street does that pop into my mind, but it does more frequently than I would like. We did everything we could to try to save 2 people's lives. A group of us picked up a car that was on top of a person's body and had him slide out. He lived for 3 days but died. But I think about that quite often. I say that this is not about me, that we all have experienced vicarious trauma. And we need to deal with it. We need to be free to talk about it. We need to take the steps to help get better from it. Next slide, please. All right. Everybody's probably tired of me talking about all the negative stuff. There's some good news. People can be resilient. They can get better. The adverse effects of their trauma can be greatly reduced. But, and we can't fix other people. The only person that can fix somebody is themselves. But for our clients in our cases, we can try to give them the support. We can try to give them the guidance. We can try to give them the referrals so that they develop a better ability to adapt, cope, and recover from the trauma that they have suffered from. So how do we foster resiliency? By understanding, by being compassionate, by nurturing, by giving them the support and the guidance that they need. People can get better. It doesn't mean all trauma can be eliminated, but everybody is capable of getting better. Judge Alicia Lattimore is going to talk in a little while about resilience and wellness and how we strive and what we can do to all try to get to a better place. So I'd love to, as I said, spend an hour on every one of those topics, but we have some great people that are going to talk about how this applies to every area of the law. Maybe not as often in some types of cases, but if we are oblivious, if we are not educated, if we are not compassionate, and we are not looking out for it, we're going to miss it, and we're not going to help our clients to the best we can. If we are trauma informed, we can be trauma responsive individually. And what you're going to hear from these judges, there's a huge development with judges throughout the state in our education about being better trauma informed and trauma responsive. So, has Judge Strostrom been able to log in yet? I know he had a busy day. Judge Strostrom, are you on? All right, maybe not yet. I'm going to call upon Judge Elizabeth Cryer. She is out of the 20th Circuit, Collier County. She is very, very trauma informed in many, many areas of the law. I'm going to ask her to talk about how these issues apply to the probate division. And she's beyond that in her experience, but I'm going to ask her to zero in on how these apply to the probate division, because I suspect some people, what in the world are you talking about in that? Judge Creer?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just checking. We've had some technical difficulties here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you, especially on these important topics. Just to give you a quick overview, I was a divorce attorney for a long time, did a little bit of criminal prosecution. As a part of my divorce practice, I also did mediation. So I've seen a lot of it, and I've been on the circuit bench for 19 years. Right now, I'm serving in guardianship. I've done a lot of probate, about 7-8 years of probate. I'm also doing dependency. So what I'd like to tell you, first of all, is to quote a friend of mine, why do our parents push our buttons? They push our buttons because they installed them. And the types of trauma that I have seen to be the most active, the most profound, the most powerful in any arena, whether it's in court or in mediation or in practice, are those traumas that we experienced in our family of origin when we were young. And in probate and guardianship cases, what you've got is, well, especially in probate, is you are dealing directly with traumas that started in a family of origin. You are dealing with your family of origin in a probate case, not mine personally, but the participants' family of origin. So you've got kids in probate mediation, or guardianship mediation, who may or may not have been abused by a parent. You've got issues, basically they involve the same issues that family law does, but the difference is in family law, you're dealing with a trauma that's being inflicted to a secondary family. In probate and guardianship, you're dealing with traumas that, number one, are being inflicted in the context of the family of origin, but also these past traumas from the family of origin. So you've got basically you've got family plus money, just like divorces, and the same type of issues come up. And so you have these issues of self-worth. Why didn't dad leave me all the money? Why did mom abandon us? Why should I feel sad about dad's death when he beat me? And all of this stuff is swirling around while you're frantically trying to mediate a case or represent a client. And as people have pointed out, we're not therapists, and certainly we cannot do therapy in a mediation session or from the bench. But it's a good idea to be aware of this for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I think the goal should be to try to not inflict as much trauma as we can. We don't want to inflict more trauma and layer that over what's already happened, or allow each of the participants to do that to each other. Now, how do we do that? Well, it's not about being nice. It's just about being aware and not allowing things to get out of control so that the participants are sort of reenacting various traumas. But most especially for mediators and litigators, it's good to know about these types of things, because one of the things that happens with trauma, especially from the family of origin, is that we create belief systems. So we create belief systems like, I'm always the victim. I'm not worth anything. God hates me. I mean, all of these kinds of things that are in play, whether you like it or not. And it makes it very, very difficult to negotiate around those issues. And so the more aware you are and watching what's happening, the more efficient and effective you can be. And again, we're not there to do therapy, but every now and then I have found in mediation, and I did it a long time, where I would just look at somebody and say, do you really think that your survival depends on whether or not you get the silverware? Because that is really what they're thinking. They really, in a moment of unconsciousness, are attaching a survival belief to whatever that is, whether it's money or silverware, whatever it is, that if they don't get that, somehow their survival is at stake, because that's the trauma. The trauma is because when we were in a vulnerable state of being children, we know that our survival is dependent on our parents. We know that if a parent is doing something bad, like substance abuse or beating us or whatever it is, that we're, as children, we are not going to say to ourselves, okay, that's that parent's problems. That has nothing to do with me, this little child. We're not going to say that as children, because we know instinctually that our survival depends on those parents. So we then attach all kinds of meanings to issues of self-worth and money. And that's what rears its ugly head when you are mediating these types of cases that deal with the family of origin. You also have issues that come up. Well, and in probate, there's another trauma that's happening. Somebody's died, usually a close family member, a parent, a spouse, somebody's died. And that in and of itself, the list of adverse childhood experiences is one of the most stressful, if not traumatic events, is when somebody dies or goes away or goes to prison or there's divorce in the family. And so there's an active trauma actually happening in probate. And even in guardianship, you've got an active trauma. Mom or dad has dementia. They're not available. In probate, they're not available either. So none of those people are available to help you process what happened in the past. So as a mediator and a litigator, it's sort of like tiptoeing around sleeping grizzly bears when, one wrong move is going to wake them up and they're going to maul you. That's kind of what happens in mediation and in representing folks in these types of situations. I find it to be so you have those types of survival issues of abandonment. Why did dad divorce mom? And now we're, negotiating with a third wife and all their kids. Those types of things happen. What I would encourage you to remember is what we try to remember also in divorce work, which is remember that the kids are sort of the unintended victims. The same holds true in guardianship cases. I've had more than one ward, a ward with cognitive decline crying in my courtroom because they're so embarrassed and so hurt by what's happening with their children fighting amongst themselves. And literally, people in guardianship mediation oftentimes will, not let certain siblings see the parent, or certain siblings will sort of act out their issues on their trauma issues on the debilitated parent. So I think the most important thing is to try not to be aware of the issues, to spot them so that you can negotiate yourself around them, and the parties also, not let them inflict more trauma on each other. And remember the unintended victims, which in guardianship would be the ward, that you want to kind of do something to protect. One of the ways is that I have done this in the past is by staying focused on what the goal is. In probate, we're dividing up stuff, just like in divorce work. And so, yes, you can be aware of all these sort of swirling tides that are going on. Every now and then you can work with it, but you're trying to sort of negotiate around those fast currents of the trauma. And the same is true in representing people. I mean, I think you can ask questions occasionally at the right moment. Do you really think that your survival is dependent on this? Or what would happen if you didn't get the silverware or whatever? So that's how I sort of see things coming up, trauma coming up in probate and guardianship cases. It's amazing to me how much participants as well as ourselves act those things out. I know that as a judge, there are certain types of issues that really energize my trauma buttons, and I have to be especially careful of them in dealing with it. For me, it's, bullies and domestic violence. So that's just, I have to be very, very careful that I'm not reacting. And one of the things I'll just leave you with is that I have found in court, for example, that when I go in with an attitude of wanting people to show us who they truly are and accept that without judgment, that it's kind of amazing what people tell you on the stand. I presided over a pretty gruesome murder case last year. And the person, of course, nobody wants their client on the stand, but he wanted to get on the stand. And of course, you don't really expect him to tell you anything that's going to be important. But goodness me, he did. And so, because he just was, he just was being who he was. And then lastly, I would just suggest that trauma is a little bit different than personality disorders and brain functioning disorders. Certainly, they are very interrelated. Some people would say one is caused by the other. I don't think that that's exactly correct, but there is a difference. And that's just something to be aware of. Some of the people that we find to be particularly difficult, they have personality disorders. Took me a long time to realize that, and it was a good psychologist that brought that out. But that's different than trauma. And quite frankly, I find the trauma harder to deal with because oftentimes these traumas from family of origin, we don't see them. It's like gravity. It's a belief system that we've developed that we're very unconscious of. So that's what I can tell you about trauma and probate and guardianship.
Thank you so much, Judge. Very insightful. Thank you much. Next, I'm going to call upon Judge Jose Esquerdo out of Fort Lauderdale, the 17th Circuit. He and I share some common bonds, including being on the Supreme Court Steering Committee of Family and the Children, and also that we were clueless about trauma for the majority of our lives.
Yeah.
Until we realized we needed to be. Judge Esquerdo, you're on, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Helinger. So, as he indicated, I'm in the 17th Judicial Circuit, where I've been presiding over a unified family court division for the last decade, which includes dependency, delinquency, domestic violence, and domestic relations. And as Judge Helinger indicated, when I started in this division, I don't think I had a clue about trauma or the impact that it had on our children. But in the last decade or so, I've gone from not only being educated in trauma, but taking time to educate others, and have been teaching at Florida Judicial College in this area for some time now. And I think we have to look at trauma not just from a global perspective, but for the impact that it has on our children. Thinking about trauma's effect from early childhood through adolescence, through early adulthood, and the impact that it has on the individuals that are in front of us, be it in a domestic relation division, a dependency division, or in any other division in a courthouse. If we take that into account and understand how that trauma impacts these individuals, I think we have a better opportunity to understand what we have in front of us and what we can do to help better understand the individuals that we're dealing with is adopt a trauma-informed stance. Shift your lens from thinking about what's wrong with you to what happened to you. It's not sufficient to just acknowledge that trauma was present without accounting for the impacts it has on the emotions, behaviors, and relationships of the individuals we deal with. We really have to look at this as a whole. You got to take a look at the individual in front of you and avoid making assumptions. Don't assume something because of the individuals in front of you. Try to understand the way trauma has impacted an individual or their family. Think about where they came from, how they started. Did they have trauma from early childhood? We talked about how it affects the prefrontal cortex. We talked about how it affects the amygdala. This isn't just it affects them. We have MRI images that show the effect on the brain when exposed to trauma at early childhood. So it's important to make sure we take that into account. We can support protective factors, encourage the individuals that we deal with to connect with friends and social supports, be engaged with supportive community, have healthy coping skills, meet one's own needs. How many children do we see in front of us that are coming up and they're reaching early adulthood and they're not addressing their own needs? uh, Teaching them problem solving skills, self esteem, spirituality, self care. These are things that a lot of times are not addressed in the legal system. And don't be scared to ask about values. We often assume that poor behavior reflects poor values. That's not necessarily the case. We might be attributing poor behavior to the fact that they have been exposed to trauma from early childhood on. It's difficult to intervene on that which you do not understand. Take a few minutes to understand the behavior before you deliver a solution. And the other thing that I would say is building emotionally safe relationships takes time, and that includes for children. Ask yourself, what are you doing to create trust? Are you being transparent, genuine, forthcoming? Are you really listening to the perspectives that you're eliciting? This is important when we're dealing with juveniles, but it's equally important when we're dealing with adults. So, I like to think that juvenile has been an area where trauma has been discussed for a long period of time. And I'll take this moment to plug the Family Court Toolkit, which was on the Florida Court's website, put together by the Office of State Court Administrator. And I'll throw the link in the chat in a second. But we've been looking at trauma and trying to become trauma responsive. But I agree with Judge Helinger. This is not something that should be limited solely to delinquency and dependency, and it shouldn't be limited solely to domestic violence or interpersonal violence or domestic relations. It's an approach that we can all look at from every aspect that comes in front of us. And if we change our lens just a little bit, maybe we'll be able to help those that we're dealing with, serving, or have in front of us.
Judge Espirito, thank you so much. It's continuing in honor of our friendship and our mutual passion, especially since we were clueless about this for so long. We like to laugh and joke about it when we were. Next, I'm going to call upon a dear friend, Judge Donna Padar, out of the 12th Circuit, Sarasota. We have taught together many, many times. She is a leader in education throughout our state. She has been back and forth between the criminal division and the family division. She's going to speak to you about trauma and criminal, the effects in criminal law, where it may not come into the classic mediation, but there's plea bargaining that goes on in resolutions all the time. Judge Padar, you're on.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for spending your lunch with us. And I see some familiar faces. In the chat, could any of you indicate if you are in criminal right now or you ever deal with criminal cases? I'm sure maybe sometimes there's an overlap in family and domestic violence. So my background is I was a prosecutor for 12 years. And towards the end of that portion of my career, I prosecuted child sex crimes. And I've been on the circuit bench in Sarasota County going on 19 years now. And I am primarily in felonies. That's where I spend most of my time, probably going on about 10 years now. But I really got into family because of Judge Helinger and Peter Ramsberger when they were teaching. And I became a groupie of theirs, not only for what they do for us in terms of ACEs and trauma information, but their case management as well, and really taking care of families. And as you all know, sometimes family can smell a little like criminal, although we have far more resources to deal with difficult people in family because they can go to jail. I'm sure many of you have wondered what you could do in a family situation when somebody just does something awful and you feel helpless to counteract that. So my introduction to being trauma informed primarily through an explanation of ACEs and adverse childhood experiences came from Judge Helinger. He has done a really great job of making sure that almost all of our 1,000 Florida judges from county, circuit, DCA, and the Supremes have exposure to and attend courses on trauma and ACEs. So your judges are trauma informed. We also feel traumatized at times. And so this has been very helpful for us too, selfishly to figure out what is bothering us and when we need a break. For those of you that are in criminal right now, I see a smattering of you. Boy, this explains a lot, doesn't it? When you find out about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, and I know Judge Iscardo said something about you don't ask, why did you do it? You ask, what happened to you? And I will say, and I'm sorry to say this, this is where there is a bit of a disconnect. And I think it's going to be a particular challenge for defense attorneys as well, because you can educate your client and they can have this epiphany. You can hire experts for mitigation and all sorts of things, and you find out that they have a really high ACEs score. They have been abused and traumatized. They have self-medicated through all kinds of drugs. They never had proper parental guidance. There was domestic violence in the home growing up. No wonder they commit crimes. No wonder they hurt people in all kinds of ways that it's very hard to be forgiving about when you're a judge on the criminal bench. And I think that's something in particular that criminal judges try and reconcile. Because when you look at the Florida Punishment Code, the top two priorities under the Criminal Punishment Code are punishment comes first, rehabilitation comes second. There's nothing in the code that says, oh, but we need to take the defendant's best interest when it comes to restoring mental health or maintaining mental health or giving them treatment or something along those lines. So I frequently come up with a quandary because you can see it. You can see why somebody has acted this way. You can see why someone has victimized other people. And especially if they're in a program in a jail, we have a really great program in our local jail here in Sarasota where they get all kinds of treatment. They have different kinds of meetings they can go to. They get cognitive behavioral therapy programs. They have this epiphany about, oh, this is what happened to me. I kind of had this unfair experience when I was growing up, and this is why I've acted out. And unfortunately, as the case pens, and they learn more, they become ready to live their best life and go on and get treatment and explore this epiphany that they've had. But time comes sentencing to answer to the state, the prosecutor and the victim in the cases about what should their punishment be, because punishment still comes first. So it can be very difficult to navigate recognition of trauma in a criminal court. One of my cases that I'll just say what's public record, an elderly man's wife passed away in the past couple weeks. She was in hospice care, and he decided he could not go on anymore. And he called local police and said, I don't want to live. And when law enforcement responded, he allegedly took out a knife and the deputy shot him. He is now in the hospital, cannot walk or talk, may never recover. And his adult daughter has had to hire a private defense attorney and do an emergency temporary guardianship. If the judge didn't understand what kind of trauma all those people were going through, you wouldn't have a heart at this point. So I think that is a really big issue for defense attorneys to deal with and for victim advocates to deal with about how to explain things to people. Thankfully, to some degree, we've introduced problem-solving courts. We have TILA, turn yourself around, turn your life around for human trafficking, DUI court, drug court. These are based upon model programs, mental health court, community treatment court, you name it, we've got it. So it's really interesting to see how we can take those aspects of trauma education and implement them in our courts and be more sensitive to how we deal with the cases, be respectful to our victims, be respectful to the goals of law enforcement and the prosecution, and honor people's rights when they're being accused of doing something. So thank you all for being a part of it. I know you don't do arbitration in criminal, but if you guys want to come up with something, let me know. So thank you so much. And thank you, Judge Helinger, for everything you do. Mwah.
Thank you, Judge Padar. Honored to be your friend. Um, it's been mentioned, I do a lot of teaching, and a lot of that has involved over the years new judges in the family domestic relations. And it's not unusual that that somebody there will just stand out. And my opinion is they have a phenomenal opportunity to be a great judge. They are trauma informed and motivated. And let me please introduce Judge Maureen Horkin out of Jacksonville, the Fourth Circuit, who was one of those people a number of years ago now. And my thoughts and predictions have lived true. Judge Horkin, going to talk about domestic relations.
Thank you, Judge Helinger. Well, I was in FAM stock many years. At this point now, I'm 7 years. I guess I'm 7 years on the bench, and Judge Donna Padar and Judge Jack Helinger were doing FAM stock, and I was very lucky to be there. Although I'm going to focus on a couple of little things that happened for me there that I thought were powerful that might be powerful for you. And that is that I had a lot of experience in my prior life as a lawyer and just a human being on lots of trauma issues because of my life. And so I sat there and they handed out the lovely questionnaire about the ACEs. And, you know, it's only 10 questions. And they don't tell you what they are, but, you know, they say, go ahead and fill it out. And so, you know, I'm filling it out thinking, oh, I don't know how many of these I'm going to get. 9. I just want to tell you I got 9. So there are 92 people here, and I want you to know there are 19 of you here that have 4 or more ACEs. And 4 or more ACEs means you have a 12 times higher risk of having a prevalence of health risks, of alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide risks. And I had to kind of cover up my sheet while I was filling it in because there's people next to me saying, who has this? Who has this? I have that. So in the honor of Brene Brown and having a wholehearted life and being vulnerable, I'm telling you that I have a trauma-informed life and I have a trauma-informed courtroom in family law. And so I come at it from a different perspective sometimes because just like the pictures of my son that are behind me, I try to make sure that they keep their focus on their children. And I do pay very much attention to 2 very important things, and then I'll tell you 1/3. But the 2 important things I try to get to right away as a judge, and I hope as a lawyer or mediator or whatever role you're in, that are helpful are who are the people before me and what happened to them? And it really helps if you can get that out because it drives what they're doing. For example, if I have a father in front of me who is just unreasonable at every turn, wanting everything, wants all the information 3 days before it comes out, is never satiated with getting the information about the doctors and all this other stuff, constantly blaming the mother, just very, very over-engaged, over-involved, micromanaging. It is always interesting if I found out that he had been abandoned by his father. And it's helpful for me to ask him and say, tell me a little bit about your dad. And then to say, I bet you don't want to be that kind of dad. So you're always going to be really involved, aren't you? And it really brings it down to the real place. And then I often have moms that are unbelievably distrusting of the men who they chose to have babies with, and they do not think they're going to do it right, and they do not think they're going to behave properly with the child, and they think they're going to be abusive, and they think they're going to abandon them, and they think they're not parenting them right. And I can always ask, tell me a little bit about your dad. And lo and behold, her dad beat the mom and was very violent. And then I try to remind them all that the person that's on the other side of the table is the one they actually either married, stood at the altar with, decided to have a baby with, and that their child loves that person and has that person as their parent, and just try to bring them back around to coming down from their panic and their trauma, which I just loved what was discussed earlier by Judge Cryer, that it is really about survival. And that is so critically important to remember, that when these people are in their trauma, they literally are feeling like their kid's going to die. Their kid is going to die. And they are just out of their head with feeling that level of panic. And so it's so important for them to calm down. So my other piece that I really try to focus on with them is focusing on the damage they do to their children, and to do it in a really loving way, but to make sure they understand what the consequences are of what happens to their kids. And so I will go through and tell them that this trauma that is happening is really hard for them. And I always ask them, isn't it hard to get divorced? Is it hard for you to sleep at night? Do you feel settled? Are you worried about money? And I mean, ask them all, how do they feel? And is it giving them stress? So they, are they worried? And all of them, of course, admit it's terrible. And then I say, imagine if you were 7 and you don't have your same bed, and you don't have your same lovey or your same dog or the kitty. I mean, I try to get them to think in terms of the consequences for their baby and how hard it is for them, because they're not even grown. And so I tell them that if you think it's hard for you, it's really hard for them. And I point out that it really has those impacts that are in the studies, which show that it is, as Judge Esquerdo was saying, that it causes brain development to be altered. That in fact, the brain becomes totally bottom heavy, and they never get to develop, from proof that shows, they never get to develop those upper decision-making skills. So it results in them doing poorly in school, them developing more situations of depression, that they often can suddenly have difficulty with concentration. They can develop ADHD. They can suddenly be depressed. If you're veering towards delinquency, I remind them all, or adolescents, I always remind them, please tell me, what were you like at 14? Were you really good? Did you give your mother or father a hard time? Are you sure you want to push this one over the edge, And so I do try to really remind them what the consequences are, and that it results in, it affects their ability to concentrate, their schoolwork, their choices, if they don't feel comfortable in one home or the other, to going out and choosing other people to trust, that it just really results in lifetime effects. And the studies that you'll find, I always go to, and I put in the end of my orders, the link to the CDC. There's a CDC website that has all the stats for the research that was done that shows how the consequences are. But the kinds of things that have long-term impact for people that have 4 or more, which is, 20% of the people studied had 4 or more. Alcoholism, alcohol abuse, chronic obstructive COPD, depression, high related quality of life, illicit drug use, risk of intimate partner violence, multiple sexual, smoking, suicide, unintended pregnancies, all sorts of terrible consequences that linger for life and make it much harder for them. And so the last thing I try to make sure everybody focuses on, that I think lawyers, as a lawyer, I did not focus on this enough, because I got very caught up in people's trauma and drama and feelings, and trying to vindicate them and make them feel better. Was, what are you going to get at the end of the day? Get them to give them the moment, let them talk about what they need to talk about, help them to feel heard and understood. But I so often have to bring lawyers to the moment of, what are you getting on your best day in court? Because that's all I can give you. All I can give you is your best day in court. And I find that clients or people who have this trauma don't let you even get there. They go around and round and around and around, and they don't even get to, okay, so what do we want? Because there are so many times that they haven't even come before me and have a narrow understanding of what it is they want and what it is that they actually are entitled to. They want everything, but they haven't figured out that all I'm going to give them is half, and that all they can have for alimony is X, and that all they're going to get for child support is this number, and they haven't done the math. Nobody's done the math. Nobody's thought about the law, and there's all this hyperbole and trauma and drama associated with it. So it's very important for us really to help them come out of trauma and do what we can do to get them to understand what is it going to get you on your best day in court. And lastly, I just thought Jack gave me this little tool that I love so much. It is my guiding principles. It's here on my desk. And it is the guiding principles that were created when the Unified Family Courts was created. And it is in 794 Southern 2nd 518, I think is the case. But he'll send it to you. He's really great at sending stuff out. Or you can ask me. But it really is important, because I had somebody make a joke at a bar meeting after I said this in court. I heard about it, of course. They didn't say it in front of me, laughing at me that I used the term therapeutic justice. Can you imagine? Judge said therapeutic justice. It's a real thing. It actually is a real thing. Therapeutic justice should be a key part of the family court process. And it's just really important to have these. And I use them more often with lawyers to encourage them to tone it down and realize that we do have an obligation to help everybody have, it even says in that case, leave here better than they were when they came to me. And I try to remind them that that is possible. It is possible that you could be divorced and have a co-parenting relationship that is better than the one that you had married. And so anyway, thank you for letting me share all of that. And I'm really grateful to the teachers and mentors that I've had that let me share that with you. Thank you, Jack.
Judge Horkin, thank you so much. As everybody can see, the judiciary in the state of Florida is very passionate about these things, okay? Because we see them and we believe in them. But it starts with you all having these conversations with your clients early on, and for mediators, not just getting to the facts of the case immediately, maybe have a little discussion to understand the people. We're about 10 minutes away. I'm going to call upon Sarah Kay. She is not a member of the judiciary, but I wish she would be, because she'd be fantastic. I call her my partner. We have presented together all around the state. She is incredibly trauma informed, and I've asked her to speak from the mediator standpoint in this. Partner, you're on.
Thank you, Judge Helinger. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I've been listening to all of the other speakers, and I don't know how much I can add. You've had some phenomenal speakers, some phenomenal perspectives. I know from the work that I've done with lots and lots of families that as I'm working with them, at the end of the day, no matter what the diagnosis, no matter how they come to you, people are people. People need respect. People need to feel heard. People need to feel understood, and you don't have to agree with them to understand the perspective. And I know a lot of times we end up engaging in this verbal sparring, thinking that if I concede my points, it's going to be some sort of validation, like I'm agreeing with what they're saying, and that's not the case. A lot of times, just simply reflecting back what you hear is all they need to feel like, okay, she gets it. She gets my perspective, and being able to move them forward constructively. And I see so many attorneys as I'm working with them that they don't get it. They see this as another case, another dollar, another, just kind of almost like a machine, if you will. Like, this is what I do with all my cases. This is how I handle all my cases. And they don't pause long enough to appreciate that one of our responsibilities as attorneys is to give our independent judgment and our independent advice to the clients, that we are not necessarily, well, at the end of the day, they're the decision makers on whether or not to settle their case, whether, what the settlement terms are. our duty is still to reflect back to them additional perspectives. Hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about you're looking for X, Y, or Z and the why behind it, and pausing long enough to help them gain that self-insight, because a lot of the people that come to us don't have that insight. They don't have that perspective. It's really eye-opening for them to start to view that maybe they're bringing something to the table as well. You know, it's very easy to finger point. It's easy to look at the other person and go, but they're doing this, but they're doing that. And asking open-ended questions and guiding them to see that, you know, what is their role? What are they bringing to the table? And then helping them creatively problem solve. So, you know, it's heartbreaking for me when I'm mediating a case and it's clear to me that the attorney is missing the trauma and missing the role that that trauma is having in the case. And then as a result of that, giving advice that may be perpetuating that trauma. And I do my best as I'm mediating to ask open-ended questions to try to gain those additional perspectives and help the attorneys and the parties see other explanations as to why they are where they are and what potential paths they have going forward. You know, and I also do my best with every single mediation, whether they get over the finish line or not, to end on a positive note, and to encourage them to say, listen, you may not have an agreement today, but that doesn't mean you'll never have an agreement. That doesn't foreclose the possibility of reaching an agreement. And I always say, I always hope that you'll keep that dialogue going forward and explore different options to get you over that finish line. So I'm so encouraged that the word about trauma and ACEs is out there. I'm really encouraged that we're having these types of webinars and these types of dialogues, and I appreciate Judge Helinger leading the charge. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, partner. Always wonderful. Last but far, far, far from least is Judge Alicia Lattimore. She is out of Orlando, the Ninth Circuit. She is the leader around our state for us in the area of resiliency and wellness. Judge Lattimore, can you kind of bring it all together for us?
I'll do my best, Judge Helinger, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to let you know that I am so grateful to be here and be invited to speak to you all about wellness and resiliency. I've been a circuit judge since 2006, so I'll let you all do the math. But throughout my time on the bench, I've had the pleasure of serving in most divisions that have been represented here today, except probate and guardianship, which I'll be headed to next year. But I'm proud to say that I'm a trauma-trained and trauma-responsive judge, having received much of the education and training throughout the years from many of the judges and participants that you've heard from or presenters that you've heard from today. Particularly that training has been critical to the current assignment I have as the problem-solving court division judge in the Ninth Judicial Circuit. Speaking of therapeutic justice, Judge Horkin, I'm handling all of the therapeutic treatment courts serving defendants with substance abuse disorder, mental illness, the lasting impact of military service, and also who more often than not bring a remarkable history of adverse childhood experiences and trauma. Also serve as co-chair of the Florida Judicial Wellness Program designed to educate and offer support to judicial officers to attain wellness. And so I'm grateful to be here and will quickly speak to you about my two favorite topics, which is wellness and resiliency. As I begin, I want us to turn back and focus on the question that Judge Helinger presented to us. How does this apply to me? Or let me rephrase. In other words, how does this apply to you? Be reminded that as judges, lawyers, and mediators, we are the foundational pillars of our justice system. We took oaths to uphold the law, to serve, and to advocate. But implicit in that oath is a commitment to bear witness to the deepest conflicts and most profound traumas of human experiences. This constant exposure to detailed accounts of abuse, loss, and violence comes at a cost that we've touched on today and known as secondary traumatic stress, or STS, or vicarious trauma. The symptom or side effect of our profession is not a sign of weakness. It is a natural cumulative response to doing emotional, difficult, compassionate work. And we as legal professionals, as legal helpers, are highly susceptible to it. Understanding the impact is the first step. So let's talk about the two critical areas we must focus on, the personal and the professional, in order to build an intentional and impenetrable path to resiliency. Resiliency is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from the impact of the trauma that we've experienced. So first, we must become vigilant observers of ourselves. Vicarious trauma can manifest subtly, often masquerading as just stress or burnout. Are you experiencing cynicism or detachment towards clients or litigants? Are you hypervigilant outside of work, always feeling on edge or anxious? Are you relying on unhealthy coping mechanisms like excessive work or substance use to numb feelings? These are not necessarily character flaws, but may be symptoms telling you that your reserves are depleted. To build personal resiliency, we must establish and defend strong, non-negotiable barriers and boundaries. This means taking active steps to create distance between the traumatic material you process and your personal life. So here are just a few suggestions that may become handy. First, implement a digital blackout. This is harder for people than I expect. Set a firm stop time for work emails and text. Turn the phone off, put down the iPad, close out the laptop. That urgent communication can almost always wait until the next morning. Second, prioritize foundational health. Foundational health is a holistic approach to wellness that focuses on building and maintaining a strong base of health habits to support your overall well-being. The basics matter more than ever. Aiming for 7 to 8 hours of sleep or fueling your body with healthy food, moving your body daily and throughout the day, and building and maintaining strong special connections and personal relationships. These aren't luxuries. They are biological requirements which are vital for mental and emotional well-being. Third, schedule rest and recovery. Do not just take time off, but be consciously engaged in activities that bring you joy, connection, and a sense of meaning outside of your professional identity. Now let's turn our attention to how we practice professional resiliency. It's imperative that we build resiliency into the fabric of our professional culture. For judges, mediators, and lawyers alike, the best defense against secondary traumatic stress is a good offense, and that's by taking a trauma-informed approach. When you proactively structure your interactions around the principles of safety, choice, and transparency, you manage the client or the litigant's nervous system, reducing their emotional distress. When they are less distressed, the intensity you absorb is lessened. And by giving clients choices, such as where to sit, when they can take a break, how to communicate, you reduce their sense of powerlessness, which in turn reduces your own sense of helplessness. We must normalize and institutionalize peer support. We spend our days advocating for clients or attending to litigants and other persons in the court's emotional needs, yet we rarely acknowledge our own. So a couple of ideas is first to debrief with your colleagues. Create small trusted circles. It can be 1 or 2 people, not for just sharing confidential details, but for processing the emotional weight of the work that we do. Sharing the load with a trusted peer, someone who understands the unique environment of the courtroom or negotiation table, or being a lawyer advocating for others, is vital to offloading that stress. Also, consider seeking professional counseling. We as judges, lawyers, and mediators are not immune to emotional impact. Seeking the guidance of a therapist or counselor is not a last resort. It is a maintenance strategy for high-performing professionals. It is a sign of self-awareness and strength, not weakness. So in conclusion, remember that secondary traumatic stress is simply the cost of caring, but we don't have to carry that cost alone, and we don't have to sacrifice ourselves to do our jobs effectively. By adopting personal and professional strategies, by recognizing the symptoms, setting firm boundaries, and leaning on each other, we not only protect our own well-being, but we become stronger, more ethical, and more resilient advocates and officers of the court for the very people we need to serve the most. So thank you, and I wish you all wellness.
Judge Lattimore, thank you so much, and thanks for all you do on these topics in the state of Florida. It's so invaluable to all of us. We are out of time. Let me make a couple of brief statements, and we will move on. Number one, thank you all for being here and hanging in. Obviously, we'd love to do this for hours and hours and hours because there's more to it. I hope we have whetted your appetite. I hope you want to learn more about it. Any of us, certainly myself and any of the other presenters today, will be glad to follow up. Just get a hold of us. We are passionate about this. I love the law, but I really, really love a conference that we don't talk about the law. And we didn't mention the law at all today. Okay, there's enough of that. All right, but we talked about an essential part of our practice. We just were able to touch the big points, but you can see by the presenters, the judiciary and the courts throughout the state with incredible people are passionate about this. I can't commit that every judge in our state is going to be trauma informed and trauma responsive, but I'm going to tell you the majority are, and I couldn't say that very many years ago. Okay, but we are because we're taught it and we know how important it is. So let's work together. Let's spread the word so we can, what's that word I talked about earlier? Help. So we can help in the best way humanly possible. I will be glad to stay on a little longer if people would have questions. No one is expected to do that. The hour and a half has run. I get it. We're all busy. But I and maybe a couple of us, if there are more questions, either verbally or in the chat, we'll be glad to. Thank you so much for participating in this. Let this be either a start or taking it to another level, depending upon where you started. Megan and Christina, thank you so much for putting this together. Great job.
Anytime. Judge Helinger, before we go to any questions, I just have some announcements real quick. Thank you so much to all of our amazing presenters. This was an amazing presentation, as you can tell, and so timely needed. This webinar, once again, was provided by the Alternative Dispute Resolution section and the Public Interest Law section. The course number for the CLE today is 9531, and that's for 1.5 hours of general CLE, 0.5 ethics, 1.0 mental health, and 1.8 IPV credit. The ADR section does have some upcoming events. Our free monthly mediator forum is on the first Friday of every month at 8 a.m. on Zoom. We have a monthly arbitrator forum, and that takes place on the second Tuesday of every month. We're launching our monthly Lunch and Learn series in January 2026, and that'll be on the second Friday of each month at noon. We also have a program on client-centered mediation on January 21st, 2026, along with a lineup of CLE for spring in 2026. And there's a lot of programming on our catalog. So please check that out at flabaradr.com. We invite you to join our amazing section to receive access to more quality CLE courses and the latest news on dispute resolution processes. Thank you so much, all of you, for your engagement.